Hello. So my literacy-based lesson today is mainly practicing the skills of sequence prediction, and some other skills that we are naturally going to be working on are expressive language skills, receptive skills, collaboration, but the primary skill that we're going to be working on is prediction. So before we start the actual lesson, because I'll be using a book, in terms of just prior thinking and prior knowledge and just getting their mind to really thinking about prediction and what comes next, we do a little activity, and I just present it in a way where, today you're gonna help me figure out what comes next. I'm gonna give you an activity, and we're gonna try to figure out from these pictures if you can really help me, because I'm trying to figure this out. What comes next? And if you can tell me what this picture is about. And they'll probably say something like, it's a person with a bat, baseball, person throwing a ball. Okay. What do you think is coming? What do you think is going to happen next? And it's going to be an open-ended discussion. People are going to raise their hand. It's going to facilitate some type of thinking. And there's really no wrong answer. It's really just them thinking, what are the possibilities? And I mean, there are so many possibilities that can happen. The person can drop the ball, for example. They can throw it. The person can hit it. Something that makes sense. But yeah, it's just really just to facilitate a conversation of the sorts. So. And then I'm going to move on to the book Brown Bear, which is a really great book about sequencing and prediction. And the reason why I chose this book, I also have very, very great felt pieces for this book, which help in terms of visual learners, because this book, in terms of prediction, it can really help auditory learners. And I think that's where their strengths would be, by me just talking and them hearing it. But in terms of visual learners, I feel like the felt pieces would be really good to just have in front of me. So that's my plan, actually. And the way I would really start it is, you all seem so great at this. If you can help me figure out what comes next with all the characters in this book, because there are a lot of characters in this book, and I think that you may be able to help me with this. So, Brown Bear, what do you see? And I'll just do the first few pages so you can get an idea. Brown Bear, what do you see? And I would put Brown Bear down first. I see a red bird looking at me. Then I would get the red bird, I would put it down, just so that they can get an idea and see it right in front of them. Very helpful. Red bird looking at me. Red bird, what do you see? I see a yellow duck looking at me. And then I'll ask them at this point, what do you think comes next on the next page? And it'll be like an open-ended answer. So they can just call out, yellow bird, what do you see? I see a blue horse looking at me. Put the blue horse down, and at that point, ask them the same thing. But at some point, blue horse, what do you see? I see a green frog looking at me. At this point, I'll challenge them a little bit, and I won't put the green frog down first. And I'll ask them, what do you think comes next? I'll challenge them a little bit midway. So I'll just keep on going like that until the end. And at this point, we've practiced this a few times, and now really comes the assessment portion of it. And I had a few assessment parts, assessment methods in mind, based off of something that Bredekamp was talking about. And he was basically, it's such an important concept where he talks about how you have to meet the children where they are as individuals and as a group. So I took that into account when we were in a large group in terms of visual learners, auditory learners, and I try to cater to both of them. But in terms of small groups too, they work differently, and in terms of it as individuals, they work differently as well. So I want to see all these components, and it's a lot easier also to assess when it's a smaller group. So at this point, we're moving into couples. So a couple group. So at this point, we're going to do a little activity. But while we're still on the rug, we're going to look at 2 pictures, and this is going to be part of the activity. But we're going to discuss the pictures first, and then they will work on it at the table. So the first picture is this, and I'll ask them, what does this look like? They'll probably talk about how this is a person, it's their birthday, it's something like that. And the second picture, this is a person bringing a cake. Okay, stop. I want you to go back to the table with your partner, and I would strategically partner them up so that, I think partners is such a great way to really assist a student with certain needs they have, or in terms of just like feeling empowered, also feeling more confident because they're good at something and they can help somebody else with it. So just strategically kind of partnering them up. If there's a really nonverbal kid and there's a really verbal kid who's more strong in that aspect, partner them up, see how that works. So kind of, doing that, and then having these copies of these 2 pictures there and giving them their own piece of paper with colored pencils, and basically going to them and saying, talk about this picture, talk to each other about it, and I want you to draw or write what you think comes next. So yeah, for this part of it, it would be a lot more helpful to have like an assistant teacher, 1 or 2, whatever you have, but to just be able to walk around, really listen to what they're talking about, facilitate conversations, which is, I think, a very important aspect of it, but I'll get to that later. So the 2 assessment portions of this that I would be using, one would be the checklist, which I would consider a formative assessment. And the reason I would use this is because of something that the author mentions. It's a very good point. The checklist can measure so many domains in terms of development. He mentions fine and gross motor skills, cognitive skills, self-help capabilities, and social communication skills. When you're trying to measure so many things at one time, a checklist is a lot easier, and it's just a lot more efficient when you're doing it with a large group. So I would have that in mind in terms of because in this lesson I would be measuring something like the way in which they express their ideas, in terms of writing. This is a kindergarten class, by the way, so I don't know if I mentioned that, but in terms of either their writing or expressive language, all that. So in terms of how they communicate themselves, their predictive skills, their receptive skills, just understanding the actual activity itself, if they're doing what was asked of them, collaborative skills, just listening to each other, listening to the conversations that are happening. That can be really helpful. So one of the strengths that the author talks about in terms of checklists, which I really agree with, is that it really just helps you, like I said, it really just helps you narrow down what you're exactly looking for. And they can really provide data that can be analyzed and compared over time, which is very helpful because you can always look back at it and be like, oh, okay, they got this, they didn't, they got this, they didn't, just it all puts it in one place. Very efficient, like I mentioned. But there is a downside to that. And he mentions that the downside to that is that it doesn't adequately capture the complexity of an individual child's competence. So it doesn't really assess the individual strength. And that sits not great with me because I want to assess the individual strength. And in terms of that, because of that, I want to see what they produce in terms of work samples, but I want to have discussions with them. And I mean, it can be difficult when it's a large group, so just having that help of an assistant teacher walking around, not only observing, but having conversations with them. And that's something that he mentions too, where observation is important, but, well, no, this is what I mentioned based off of what he said. The observations are important, but interviewing about work samples that achieves a lot more in the situation. That's what I mentioned, but I based that off of what he said, where he said vicarious learning. Vicarious learning is such a great concept to think about when it comes to strategic partnerships, where kids learn from each other, and you have to really think about who you're partnering kids up with because of that. Because there are kids that when they work together with other people or they observe other people, they really just learn so much from just being there, just being present. But in terms of, observation, the author mentions that observing children's behavior is more important, but it's important, but it doesn't reveal what children are actually thinking. So you really have to, intentional teachers interview individuals in small groups. So that's pretty much what I'm basing this off of, that to really understand what a child's thinking, you really have to interview them, you have to talk to them. And that's pretty much what I based it off of, because he also mentioned small group discussions provide opportunities to elicit children's thinking in collaboration with other children. So you're really putting them the point is to put them in an environment where, in a situation where they're thriving because they're talking to each other. They're really just focusing on the actual the actual problem, like what comes next. So that is why, in order for me to understand what's going on with every individual child, which can be a little bit challenging when there's a lot of children, my plan would just be, have an assistant teacher around, going around and just talking to the kids about what, tell me about your drawing, tell me about what you made, and just writing that down. And that can, I feel, shed some more light and clarify things when it comes to the checklist. So you have the checklist, and you have that work sample narrative, like that, the children's words, and just having that conversation with them. And also just like checking in with them about, if they're having a hard time really understanding, expressing what they produced and what they made, you can talk to them about like what, or just like how to assess the actual collaboration piece of it. Ask them how was it working with the other person? What did the other person say? What were their thoughts? What did they do? So just, facilitating that conversation, I think would be really helpful. But I think that's about it. So thank you.